All right, welcome everyone to our first webinar within the SMARTEES project. My name is Niklas Mischkowski. I'm working for ePlay Europe and will be moderating our webinar today. With me is my colleague Sarah De Mayo. She will control our interactive sessions and be there with us in the respective moments. So to start with, what we're going to look at today, I'm just briefly going to outline on our topic, local leadership, or from usual suspects to local heroes, how to work together with your citizens towards a low-carbon society. So I think the title tells already kind of what we're going for. It's going to be citizen engagement at the city level especially. So our agenda is basically the short view on the SMARTEES project to give you a background where we're coming from here. And yeah, the main part then consists of the contributions from our three speakers. These are Erika Lofström from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, Soren Hermansen from the Samsø Energy Academy in Denmark, and from Francis Bray of Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden. So after each contribution, we're going to have some time for interaction. After the first presentation, we're having a quick poll to take as an input for the second presentation. And then after the second presentation, as well as the third presentation, we're going to have a question and answer session. And you see this little control board there on the top right of the screen now. There you have the space where you can answer these questions, and we're going to try to take them up as much as possible. So that means our first Q&A session opens the floor with both Erika Lofström and Soren Hermansen. And then the second Q&A session will give you the chance to address all three of the speakers together. So let's start. SMARTEES stands for Social Innovation Modeling Approaches to Realizing Transition to Energy Efficiency and Sustainability. The empirical basis in this project is our 10 case studies clustered in 5 types of social innovation from pilot projects all over Europe, studying the socioeconomic and structural drivers and barriers of social innovation. So the final aim of the project is to develop a policy sandbox tool, which is a software program that is programmed to offer different grounded scenarios as a basis for policy making. And our webinar series is going to work its way forward to a test run of exactly this last sandbox tool. So just that you know, this is the first one. We're going to have a second one, which we will announce in the end, and then finally a third one aiming for this tool. So a last glimpse on the project. This map shows you the participating cities as well as the clusters of the SMARTEES project. If you want to know more about it and the cases in detail, just visit our website, and there you can find most information you might be looking for. All right, so just as a quick startup, I hope this gave you a good overview. Now, before welcoming our first speaker, I want to create a quick impression with you, just so you kind of who's actually participating today, as to give us a little glimpse on who we will be expecting questions from later on. So we prepared a poll, which should appear every moment. And this poll will be asking you what context you are actually working in. So the poll is open now, and just pick your choice. We'll give you a couple seconds for that. All right, and then, yeah, we'll wait a little bit more. 90% have voted. Okay, I think we can close it. Thank you very much. Everybody's done, all right. So the results show, okay, we have 14% from city government, 7% from private companies, 38% from NGO or citizen initiatives, and 41 from others. All right, so that is quite a good mix, I would say. Mostly citizen, and yeah, well, whatever others mean, welcome. We're happy to have you here. Okay, so now our first speaker to begin with will be Erika Lofström from NTNU. Erika works as a researcher at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim, and she teaches human and computer interaction. In her work, she also combines her competences in both the technical sciences as well as social sciences. So Erika is going to talk about people at the heart of transitions, networks of social innovation, and with that, she's going to give us an introduction to kind of the social side of things here. Let us welcome Erika. Switching the microphones now, and Erika, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Erika, as Niklas so eloquently put it. I will talk about one of the cases in SMARTEES and exemplify it based on a mapping exercise that we did internally at NTNU and which we used also for the other cases in SMARTEES. And it is a visual mapping method, so I will try to take you through both the method and, of course, the Järva case, which is a very exciting one in the district regeneration cluster of SMARTEES. So it has to do with going from, well, I'm trying to change the presentation. Can someone please help me, because I don't seem to have the control. Thank you. So Järva in Stockholm is one of the main cases in SMARTEES, and it is a million house community, so it built in the 60s and up until the 1980s, and it has 60,000 residents now, and 80% of those are immigrants or of immigrant background, and it's municipality-owned landlord residential houses. It doesn't mean, however, it's necessarily social housing, because in Sweden it's very common to be renting your apartment. But it is a suburban neighborhood with a high concentration of socio-economic disadvantage. And the municipality and the city of Stockholm realized that they had to do something to lift this area socially, mainly to begin with, and then the environmental aspect came in later. So it has a large degree of unemployment, and this was also a problem on what that was wanted to do something about. Yes. So what we did is that we developed a visual mapping method, and we identified type of agents and their social networks. And then we did qualitative interviews with each key agent, and we also wanted to collect data to support our visual mapping method. So I will show you how we did it in Stockholm Järva. And hopefully it will also take us through the case. Next slide, please. Yes, there it is. So what we did was we started with categories of actors. So you can see the squares here on the picture. Public is in red, citizens it's in gray, education agents are in blue, and private is in green. And then we had some important conditions or triggers that we put into the social innovation or the agents, and we did this mapping for certain periods of time to illustrate what's happening in the case. So please go to the next slide. Here is the first map of Järva. And there is an extreme need for upgrade. There is a lot of media attention. You can see in the middle here, there is a lot of media attention. And going into this media is reports of resistance and people who are angry and people who are actually throwing eggs at the local community or the municipal house rental lord. So it's really a heated situation we get into in 2007 here, and the agent for the rental people, there is an agency for them that is looking after their best interests, and they are in heated discussions with the landlord here because they've just sent out a note saying that everyone in 3 different buildings will have to move out. They are upgrading the houses, and also they are tearing down 2 of the houses to build new, more luxurious flats. And with no indication of this going to happen, people got really angry with the rental landlord, and the protests were extreme, and people were actually thrown eggs and tomatoes at. So it was really something heated going on. So here we see a lot of ethnic diversity clustering, low reputation area going in, and we see a top-down strategy that was desperately in need of fixing so that it wouldn't become such a big problem for them to communicate with residents. So the intentions were good, as they usually are, but the results were quite the opposite of what was expected. Please switch to the next slide. So as to cure this problem that emerged, you had something emerging here is called the Järva dialogue. And what the Svenska Bostäder, the real estate, the owners of the rental houses did was to actually recruit the main representative from the union of tenants to their own organization, because she had started to have dialogues that were really fruitful, and she was able to communicate with these different households and residents in the area. And a picture started to emerge which showed that people had actually a lot of place identity and positive feelings towards their own neighborhood. So they were actually very fond of their neighborhood. And this resulted in something that is called Järvalyft. That is the social innovation we are looking at in Järva, and we are also looking at how it can be used in other parts of Stockholm now and in other parts of the world. So this is a map, for instance. What you see in the background here is a map where people had put their yellow dots where they live. The green dots is where they feel safe, and the red dots in the neighborhood is where they don't feel safe. And as you see, there is a clustering of places where people feel not safe. And it was especially women and young people who did not feel safe in these areas. So this was a big issue to improve this as part of the project. And they slowly started to get a better relationship to the tenants, and had promised them they wouldn't have to move out, and they wouldn't tear down the 2 buildings that were threatened to be torn down. And they involved people so that they had local ambassadors, and they started to have more of an involvement of people. And one of the main problems here, please switch to the next picture. One of the main problems here was that not everyone was involved, and not everyone was part of a community. They had like fractions of different immigrants groups, for instance, separately. They have a lot of women who are at home not working and who are not able to get around from the neighborhood. So they actually started bicycle courses for people and swimming courses, and they started participation programs, which is one of those was the map I just showed you is from one of those meetings. So they had a lot of dialogues coming up, and they interviewed people, in-depth interviews with people, and it was really a lot of things emerging. And here is what you see emerging between 2008 and 2015 is an inclusive, iterative process. So you have the Järva dialogue emerging slowly and surely, and you have also a new positive Järva narrative emerging. One of the most interesting things of this process, please switch to the next picture. Yes, you see a totally different picture emerging from 2015 until today, and that is that you have people who are empowered in the neighborhood. You have dialogues, you have local democracy, and you have something called feminist city planning, which is what they call it when they have managed to involve all these women that were not previously very much part of the decision making in the area. And they have also managed to get people more interested in voting in democratic elections. So it's not only an effect on the short run and locally, but also on the more national level. So please switch to the next picture. Thank you very much. I think I spent my time at least maybe a bit more. I'm sorry if I did. Please let me know if you have any questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Erika, for this insightful presentation. For our participants, if you have any questions to Erika and her presentation, please note them down in the questions window, and we're having time to discuss them after our second presentation. So our second speaker will be Søren Hermansen. Before introducing him, let's start with a small poll on your opinion. What do you believe is the major challenge for successful energy transitions? And we will start the poll right now. You should be seeing it. And you have a multiple choice. You can take different options. You don't have to take only one. All right, if you haven't picked anything, take your last choices. Okay, I'm going to close the poll right now. So 85% think it's political will, 26% technological feasibility, good half acceptance of policies, a third consumption patterns, and about a third fatalism or cynicism. So the vast majority agrees on the political will, and then we have a mix of things, I would say. All right, thank you a lot for that. So now from this, let me present Søren, our second speaker. Søren Hermansen is from the Samsø Energy Academy in Denmark. He's the driver behind the energy transition on the island of Samsø. Since 1998, he's been working as CEO of the Energy Academy, and the experiences in citizen engagement, financing, education, and training for local leadership are by now sought after by international organizations, municipalities, as well as other NGOs. For all this work, he even received Time Magazine's Green Hero 2008 award. Having said this, I'm looking forward to hear Søren's story and about his experiences on Samsø Island. And I hope he will pick up the poll we just had and let us know his perspective on this. Thank you very much for sharing. And Søren, the floor is yours. Søren, sorry, we can't hear you right now. You're self-muted. Søren, can you try again? Hello, hello, hello. Is it? No, I still can't hear you. Are you self-muted? No?
What about now?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. All right, sorry for that.
Better now? Okay, so it takes away my noise here. Okay, sorry about that. Are we going now?
Yeah, we're good. It's
Okay.
yours.
All right, so I'll try again. I see that, I mean, the poll is interesting because you can say political will is maybe the highest priority, but I think what I'm going to stress here is that I think it is very important to translate political will into local acceptance, and not acceptance of policies, but acceptances of change, because policies will be the instrument to make change in the local community. And change is the wind turbine in front of people's window. It is the biogas plant that has a risk of smelling. It is more and more technology introduced in the local community. And this is causing, in many situations, a lot of local problems because people don't really understand why is this happening. Yeah, next slide, please. What we try to stress is always that political framework or political decisions is made in a language we usually don't really understand. You have to be a politician, academic, to be able to talk from this point of action where you understand the story or the narrative. So we have this thing that human being exists in language, conversation, stories, and narratives. You actually talk yourself into participating in the project. Human beings invent their worlds with words, conversations, and actions. And finally, you could say organizations are networks of conversations, of commitments for taking action and producing results. So if we don't feel that we are connected to the change, then we don't accept the change. The change will not be ours before we understand and start talking about it as if it was ours. You could have like a very direct ownership, or you can have a more indirect ownership or more psychological ownership. A feeling of ownership is equally good. It doesn't have to be physical. It can also be psychological ownership. But before this, there's a process. Next slide. And this process includes we usually say in our context when we do this, we need to have a place where we start from. So the sense of here. So this is a compass. This big image here is a compass. So you have this sense of here, the exact spot where you are activating your ideas and dreams and your stories from. So the here is then talking about the community. Who are we? And before you have identified this, you cannot really move. The new, what can we do, which is the up, where are we going with this? And the change is, what do we want to do? And the action, what do we then finally do actually? And this is a process that takes a long time, and you can't really do it overnight. You have to do it in a process where you include other things also. What is the livelihood of the community? How do we feel? Are we talking together? Or do we have major problems in our society, basically on other things than sustainability? But it could also be jobs or the lack of a good school or any other threats in a community that has a higher priority than sustainability has to be addressed. So we actually link the different aspects of change together. Next, please. Next slide. So this is what we did. So we did a lot of radical changes here. In less than 10 years, we had an investment of about 70 million euros worth of energy installations. And it's only 3,800 people living on my island. We produce district heating instead of oil burners. We are having 11 megawatt big, very large wind turbines on land. We have 10 offshore wind turbines. We have a lot of solar panels. We have the highest number of electric vehicles, and so on and so forth. We made a lot of changes in a 10-year period, which led to, we could say that we were 100% self-supplied. And a lot of people say to them, wow, that was a fantastic project. I think it was a fantastic process, because we realized that if we didn't do anything, we actually kind of forecasted that we would be in trouble in 10 years' time if we didn't change the pattern. We would lose jobs, families would immigrate out of the community to the big cities, and they wouldn't come back. So the big problem was not sustainability, it was to sustain our community in a way with jobs, people, kids in the school, and all the things that is needed to make this happen. when people understood this, they also saw the installation of energy technology as a means or a tool to make transition or make change. Next, please. So you see, this is my island. This is really beautiful. I think we live in the most beautiful place on earth, which many maybe disagree, but I feel that this is, and so do my fellow islanders on Samsø. Next slide. And we still want to put wind turbines in this beautiful landscape. So this is a picture from the early morning. And you could say, we have this is a global discussion, and more people are talking about not in my backyard. We don't want to pollute the horizon with big installations, big technical installations. So we needed to talk about this also because Samsø is also a tourist island. It's a nature island. It's a nature reserve. And there's many things that talks against putting up wind turbines in a beautiful little environment like an island. But in the picture, if you can see it in the center right part of the picture, you see there's some smoke coming out of the chimney. That's 15 kilometers away. There's a coal-fired power station, and we used to have all our electricity from this power station. When we put up the turbines, we could say we are ventilating the smoke away from Samsø by putting up these turbines. So we made a reason for the turbines to be there because electricity is invisible. You can't see it, but pollution is visible, and you can see that the consequences of pollution is now climate change. So the reason for the turbines was not to disturb and spoil the landscape, but it was to ventilate or suppress the emission of carbon dioxide. Next. So we set up this as an experiment. We said to them, we need to try something. Because the other thing is conservatism. In many local communities, you have a conservative attitude. People say, yeah, but it's maybe fine, but not here. We know what we have, but we fear the future somehow. So we try to say this in this way. An experiment doesn't have to be perfect. Experiments can open the way for something radically new. So being in a remote, vulnerable environment means that you have to be more risk willing. You have to do things that you don't know. You have to do things that might have a potential of changing. So when you then do it and the changes comes, then you are a little bit more prepared that changes might also hurt a little bit. That you have to suffer a little bit for the change to be successful. And we have seen this being successful. We have paid back all our costs and the debts is out. And we have now a totally 100% green transition. But I can tell you in the beginning of this process, people were very kind of hesitating, saying, no, it's too expensive, too complicated, we can't do this. Now we did it. Next, please. So we need to bring people together also. Power without love is coarse and ruthless. Love without power is sentimental. We need to bring together the oppositions. You have the business guys on one side, they want to make money, they want to make business. You have the hippies or the idealists, the visionaries on the other side, and they usually argue towards each other. They don't like each other because the other ones think that the opposition is not thinking right. That the hippies, they want to save the world, but they don't have any money. And the business guys, they want to make money and they don't care about the environment. Maybe that's not true. And if you meet and start exchanging, all of a sudden you become much more powerful because you can then have the vision and the power behind it to make change. This is also what happened. Next. So these are the visionaries buying the wind turbines. This is not business guys. This is regular citizens from my island buying the construction of the offshore wind turbines. So we were cooperatively owning these turbines, and we managed and administrated the turbines. And the starting point was this: when we put on the hard hats, we became business people together, and all of a sudden we changed the attitude from being ignorant customers to being active producers of energy. So this activating people's minds and physics was really a powerful message also to do more than this. When we successfully did this project, we could do more. So it's also about building capacity and competence and trust in the society. Next, please. So, and this is the result. We had the biggest offshore wind installations in the world for a little while. And that was a very brave and maybe the biggest investment we ever made in this little community. And it was kind of a front runner project also. And we can now kind of proudly say that we did this, but it was a very risky project. And people, I mean, they didn't sleep much in the first couple of years until we realized that they were doing what we promised it to do. Next. And today, the surplus production from the turbines is now used to buy electric cars, have solar garages and all sort of things. So we have now turned this into kind of a circular economy. So the profit from the production and the sale of energy is now introduced as kind of a banking system where we can call it circular economy, because we used to have to borrow this money from outside. Now we make them by selling electricity so we can install in the next generation of infrastructure. Next, please. So a strong, sustainable and robust community must share locality, activity and mentality. Maybe the two first are obvious, locality and activity, but the mentality part is that we start thinking in the same direction. Very often we are kind of separated. We think in many different directions. We are very selfish in our thinking, but somebody has to kind of put it down in a schedule and describe where we want to do with this. And this creates kind of a certain emotional feeling of a mentality shift. So when the mentality is right, we can make much braver decisions and much more difficult and complicated decisions. Next, please. So the meeting format is also interesting. In the beginning, we had a lot of experts from outside coming to talk to us about how to make change. We very soon found out that people would then go home after a meeting and think, well, they know it all, why should I bother? So we started setting up the meeting format in a circle. So everybody was participating, and we had the point of meeting, or the idea of the meeting was in the center. So everybody fed in with their opinions to this meeting, and we became much more proactive in the process, and people participated much more directly in it and felt that I was important. It was very important for me to be in this meeting because I was partaking in the decision making. Next, please. Yeah, this is just a physical image of how we sit around the campfire and feeling good about being there. We can feel the warmth from the center. Next. So basically, it's about bread and butter. When we want to make change, we need to meet people where they are, which is, I mean, how do you keep your job? How do you keep up being able to feed your family? And how do you keep up doing this without harming the environment? So this is kind of basically the whole idea about this, is to produce the next kind of bread and butter and security of your life. Next, please. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Søren. Thank you very much for this inspiring insight. We now have time to answer questions and get into a short first discussion, so to say. I also welcome back Erika again to join in, and we are ready to take the first questions. My colleague Sarah De Meyer will read them out to you.
So we already have a question for Erika. You said that you first identified agents in the community. How did you identify them? Which criteria did you use? And did they turn out to be key actors for the process of transition? This question is from Enner Bush.
I agree, it was a little bit fast with the presentation. We only had 8 minutes. I can tell you how we identified the agents. We did this in connection to talking to the contacts we have in the city of Stockholm, those who were involved. So we did a big round of interviews, in-depth interviews with central players that we knew had formal assignments in the process. And then we talked to all of those and asked them to help us identify the groups that were interested and the agents. And we came up with these agents also based on both interviews and also literature review of a lot of research that's been done before on the area, but with another focus than social innovation. So I think that they all emerged to be key actors in our project. Yes, I would say so. We have more actors than this, but we did not include everyone, obviously. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. I mean, we have residents of Järva, for instance. That's a rather big group of agents. It's a lot of people that are the residents of Järva, but we have separated it into those who were actively involved in their own upgrading of their own houses, because they got to get involved and choose between 3 levels of upgrading later. And then we have the general public that were also part of being agents of this. But we did not include the general public that are not residents of Järva as such in this group, because they were represented instead via the media reports, and they had a picture that was kind of different from what was the picture of the local residents of what their neighborhood was all about. So we had to obviously exclude some agents that would have been interesting, but that were not as actively part of the process. So this was quite a long discussion to identify these agents. Actually, it took some time, and we may still change our minds about some of them, but I think we have the main actors here and agents, yes. Should I?
Okay, thank you a lot, Erika. We have other questions that arrived. So this one is for Soren. So the question is, how can the success story from Samsø can be transferred over to other types model of society? For instance, small towns, cities, non-island communities. Are there any key steps, consideration to implement? The question is from Paul Gilbert.
I think it's important to remember that people are people, no matter where they live. I mean, it's also kind of, it doesn't have to be an island. I think when you address the problem, then you need to be able to identify the people you're talking to. So it can be kind of a block in a city. It can be an area or an apartment building. It can be many different kind of structures where you can identify a community. And I think the identification of a community, so you can sometimes say we. I mean, if you can say we in the community without kind of just being too theoretical, I think you can surround the area you are talking to or talking with, because I think it's important to include people in the process. We have a lot of different scales in Denmark, and I think we have them in Scandinavia in general. There's also some in Germany. There's a lot of Energiewende or Dorfs, where you have a whole community up to 10,000 or 20,000 people that has kind of committed to a transition program or a policy where you can make a sustainable energy plan. So I think it's about the identification of things, that you're not too general in your attitude, but you actually boil it down and start narrowing it down to kind of a certain area where you want to make change, so you can address the change to and with the public or the people who live in that area. I think that is a very important starting process before you actually start saying, so we're going to build some wind turbines or some district heating and make the changes for you, but maybe say we are going to make the changes with you.
Thank you a lot, Soren. I think that this answer also answers to Aaron's Goldie McSorley question about the scale of the implementation of the energy transition, as well as the question from Enerbush, who also wanted to know how to transfer that to an urban setting. So thank you a lot. I think we can keep on going. So I will pass again the audio to my colleague Niklas.
All right, so thank you a lot, Sarah, and thank you all for the questions. Now, with any question we haven't heard so far, we might consider later on. As our final speaker now, I want to welcome Francis Bray from Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden. Francis works as a professor or associate professor at the Department of Space, Earth and Environment. Her research assesses different personal mobility options, such as alternative fuel vehicles and electric vehicles, as well as innovative mobility forms such as car sharing. For her PhD, she received in 2011 the Jan Erik Sundgren Award from Chalmers University. for her contribution to sustainable development and research. So today she's going to sum up on this question, what are the main patterns and also the differences among successful transitions? Thanks for being with us, and we're looking forward to your presentation. The floor is yours, Francis.
Hello. Well, can you hear me now? I just heard that I was unmuted. So thank you very much, Niklas, and thank you for the presentation of me. So could we go on to the next slide, please? So yeah, so I wanted, with this successful transitions, like here we have a focus on social innovations. And so I thought one of the roles I could do when summing up is actually taking a step back and saying, what are social innovations? And so social innovations are new social practices which involve then people or a combination of different practices. And there's often an aim to be able to create some kind of new relationship or collaboration, as we have seen has happened in both the examples that have been presented before. It's also, when you talk about social innovations, normally social innovations that are not only create innovations that are not only good for society, but also increase society's capacity to act. So it's a question of involving more people and therefore giving them the capacity to act, not only in the innovation itself, but even into other types of projects, as the example where in Järva, where that Erika told about, where you even got more citizens to vote in public elections, for example, that were not so much local, but enhancing their ability to get involved in society in general. Next slide, please. So then why? Somehow that has touched on it before, but I think looking at it, you see 3 dimensions of why social innovations are important. One is that it's a question of satisfaction of human needs. And if we go back to the basic definition of sustainable development, that is actually what we want to do with it, and satisfaction of human needs both today and in the future. It's often also a question of changing social relations, that we saw in the example of Järva. We might have had what has perceived, at least from the outside, as problematic social relations, or you can have a different in views between how Järva is perceived inside the community and outside the community. So that's also a kind of changing in that kind of relation. And as has been touched on before, is this empowerment feeling of getting the people involved and feeling that they are participating in the creation of their everyday life. And then, as we see, also using this social innovation to catalyze a larger transformation process, and maybe not just achieve a more greener energy system, but also a larger transformation of society. Next slide, please. So some of the things I'm saying here, I'm just like kind of boiling down, and I've used some keywords that I think are important to do it. So as Søren stressed, the idea of it being local, so having a locality, the sense of here, is an important part in social innovations. So anchoring it in a local environment. That also implies that local bodies and different actors, even of administration, are very important to bring in. And as we saw, the poll that we had before stresses this, the role of political will. But it's the political will of also then creating this we feeling and having different people involved and getting them working together. And that's working together not only between different actors, but like even within political bodies, for example, city municipality, there's very often a differentiation between different silos. You have the transport or traffic administration, you have the housing administration, you have different parts working with finance. And there is also the need to have involvement of these different parts working together. There was one question regarding on which actors to involve. So I think part of understanding which actors to involve is also understanding the local community, understanding this local here and who is active, which are the organizations or the different groups that are active, but then also looking at who's not active, who is let out, and whose voices are not heard in the current system at have, and making sure to reach out to those as well. So sometimes a method that can be used is snowballing, but that is that you ask people who is important, and then you get who should we talk to next as a way of moving forward. The only thing to be weary about that you don't miss out somebody by that is not addressed that way. Next slide, please. And here, and I want to stress communication, which I think Søren put out very well on talking that we are, language is so important in forming our communities. But I also want to stress one thing in communication, and that's that communication sometimes is interpreted of just, we have to reach out, but communication is just as much about listening and having a transparency in the process also of how it is going on. I think it's important also, we've seen here 2 successful examples to learn also from the unsuccessful examples. I can take an example from my city of Gothenburg, where there's been a huge transformation process of trying to build a larger infrastructure project, both within rail and with and new roads. And this has not been very popular, and part of it has been financed through congestion charging, and there was also a popular referendum that voted down the congestion charging, and now one is moving ahead anyway. But a lot of the reason when one has studied out why there's a large opposition to this is because it was not really well communicated. Kind of as Søren saying, it was when he was talking about that you put the wind turbines, you say, if you want to say that we are doing the change with you, rather than just saying we are imposing this and not explaining why you're doing it. It was not shown of how that built into a vision of a more sustainable Gothenburg. It was not shown on how it would affect people's everyday life, both in the transition period and afterwards. And so therefore it was seen as a very top-down process that then met a lot of opposition. So that's why I want to see that you can learn also from failures as well as from successful transitions. And I think Søren pointed out that it's important with the experimenting, but when you experiment, you both have to listen and listen of also what went wrong in some cases. Next slide, please. So when it comes down, what it boils down is to a lot of respect. And that is one, respect for the people that cooperating and working together, and being aware that different actors are bearers of different types of knowledge. So as experts might have one type of knowledge, the people living in the local community will have a different type of knowledge. And that is one important thing to be aware of when one is working, and to be able, that is necessary to be able to have this cooperation that is key for social innovations. If there are setbacks, well, of course, one has to be aware of that there can be setbacks and that it takes time for this communication and involvement. It's an iterative process, as Erika said. And then if one has a setback, the question one can ask oneself is, how can we listen better and involve more people? And then hopefully when one gets this, one creates a better cooperation that then leads to the empowerment and the changes that we have seen in Samsø and in Järva. Okay, thank you. That's all for me now.
All right, thank you very much, Francis, for this very nice summary. So with this now, we're going to the last round of discussion. I therefore welcome back everyone on video, so all the speakers at least, whom are ready to take on your last questions. And yeah, I hand over to Sarah to read out anything that comes in.
So we don't have new questions from the attendees, but maybe Erika raised her hand. She has maybe a question to another speaker. You're self-muted, Erika. Yeah, that works.
Yeah, I think I was double muted actually, but I still want to say something. I wanted to comment on some of the things that Francis said, because she really did a good summing up of this. But what I would like to stress is that usually there is not like a successful project and a not so successful project. It's usually a question of how you handle your mistakes, because you will have different settings in different areas and neighborhoods. You will have different people living. And in Järva, for instance, they made a huge mistake in the beginning. They almost messed up the whole process and made people really hostile against the upgradings that were going to happen. And all the good intentions of lifting the area socially and environmentally later was almost disappeared in the process, because they managed to address people in the wrong way, using the wrong channels, and using a very top-down perspective. And one thing that was the problem was they didn't know the citizens, they didn't know the residents of the area, they did not realize how much people were attached to this neighborhood and the actual qualities they had with it. They assumed that people would be more than willing to move, when in fact they were not, and they actually wanted to stay in the neighborhood and make it better. So this was very well handled. So sometimes mistakes can be also good. I don't think we should be too fast to discard projects because they fail at some point or another. Usually sometimes at least, we do try to hide this, and it's not a good idea when you do research to try to hide the mistakes, because they can actually be part of a success story. If I make sense, I'm not sure I do, but I'm trying to. Yeah. Francis?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that was the idea with putting out that learning by mistakes. It can be also in this iterative process within it, that, as I said, I said there will be setbacks in all kind of processes when you work, and I would say probably setbacks might be a better word than mistakes, even if it's might be because of that, where you really realize, okay, it's not going as we expected, but that is when you have to stop and take a step back and question, are we listening enough? Are we involving the right people? How can we do this in a better way? And I guess that is, Järva is a very good example of when they managed to do that instead of just abandoning or pushing forward, where maybe is what they did in Gothenburg instead.
Thank you, Francis. Soren, do you want to react?
I mean, you cannot do anything without making mistakes. So I think it is important to make mistakes, because otherwise nothing moves. Mistakes can be kind of leading to better solutions. Also, because how do you wake up what you call it decision makers and participate in the process? If you do it right from the desk, then you have what we call a desktop tyranny, or like a bureaucracy that's taking care of everything. And of course, the staff, the servants of civil society in the bureaucracy wants to be mistake free. I don't know. We have this generation of no mistakes, which is not real. Mistakes are part of transition. And maybe we should talk, I mean, we can just call it transition, because this is part of the learning process and the curve here. I think what is the most interesting observation seen from my side is that the society in general is leaning on top-down policies and decisions. We are working with the UN development goals. We are working with national targets for sustainable transition and CO2 emission and stuff like that. But nobody really think about how do we translate that message into kind of a local activity and activate people in a building complex or in an island or in a society or in a town, in a society. It is all kind of worked out from desktops. And I think this is maybe one of the biggest errors or mistakes that we are making. If we want to make a faster process and we are giving ourselves only a few years to make a transition because of the climate change, I think we need to activate much more on the ground level and have a lot of, I mean, millions of examples of society taking action and going into this process. Of course, it has to go hand in hand with the top down, but not the one alone. It won't work.
Thank you a lot, Søren.
We've had 25 years of, or since 1992, we've had climate top meetings around the world, and that it hasn't led to a lot of speedy action, as far as I know. So something must be handled differently if we want to realize the climate factors or the consequences of climate change.
There is a question that arrived from Peter Owen about when the community is large, how do we break it down to manageable groups? It is geographic or interest-based or something else, the criteria of creating these networks and this community for change?
I think it's multiple. For me, I think it's about addressing the change to a certain district or a certain area. I mean, in Copenhagen, there's a lot of changes seen that there's a very extended bicycle network. There's a very extended, now they have extended the metro to different parts of the town as well. And then you could say that the citizens' interest of this is, what is that then? I mean, are we still trying to get the car as far into the city as possible, or will we change this and make it possible for people to commute and work from a distance, or how do we do this? I mean, I think we need to sit down and talk with people. What do you really want with your life? Do you want to commute every day to go to your work in a central position in town, or do you want to have workspaces decentralized from the existing structure? Because we are not really asking people these questions. This is just the consequences of multinational big corporations, that they have their headquarters and people want to move to these headquarters, the big hospital, the big factory, and the big structures. And so the decentralized structure starts with a discussion about what is the good life. And we haven't had that. It becomes technical and bureaucratic, and that's where you leave people out of the equation. And I think that is maybe the first move you have to do before you say you can scale the changes.
All right. Thank you very much for these answers and insights. With an eye on the clock, I would like to wrap up our session now. I know we could continue this forever, but we will have a second and a third webinar, so we might be able to do parts of that. So I want to thank you all, especially our speakers, of course. You really made this a great webinar, I think. Moreover, I hope that all of you, our participants, enjoyed this webinar. If you have any feedback, yeah, feel free to type some into the box. We're trying to consider that for the future. And before saying goodbye, let me announce our second webinar, which takes place as part of our series on Wednesday, the 8th of April, 2020. Same time, same place. So you have quite a time until then, but you will also receive an invitation in the next days to make sure you don't lose it out of sight. So again, we hope to see you for our next webinar. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Søren, and thank you, Francis, for your contributions. And with this, I wish all of you a nice day and have a good remaining week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.